Joining us now is Matt Whitaker. He's the former acting attorney general under President Trump and a senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute. Sir, good to have you with us again. Thank you.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. I was pleased to see you standing on that stage last night. That must have been a neat experience.
Yeah, it was. We had a good night, obviously, here in Iowa, but we could feel it as we travel around the state. And I talked to my neighbors and friends and the people I grew up with, and it was very obvious to me that the love for Donald Trump continued, and everybody was happy to support him. Our neighborhood precinct caucuses. It's really great. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but we wrote names on pieces of paper. Everybody was issued one when they signed in, and then they were collected and they were counted in front of everybody, and we had a result within an hour. It's pretty amazing.
It is. It's amazing. Oh, it turns out it is possible to run an election in a secure way, and Iowa just demonstrated it last night. Were there any surprises for you in some of the results? Obviously, this is the biggest electoral victory a Republican has had in an open primary in Iowa ever. It's a historic victory. Also, I noticed that that among people without a college degree, Donald Trump was just dominant yesterday, and he performed better with women than he did men even yesterday, despite the fact that he performed very well with both.
Yeah, that was an interesting stat. I mean, there was just so much that was kind of key takeaways. But I think if you boil it down, is Iowans understood sort of what Donald Trump had done when he was president, those first 4 years, what he will do in his next 4 years, and they want those policies back. Everybody's suffering in their own unique way from Joe Biden's America, whether it's inflation, whether it's the threat of a massive tax increase, whether it's open borders, all the things that voters are facing in their real lives, schools just deteriorating. I mean, I had more conversations at my precinct caucus with my neighbors about how bad the school district that I grew up in has become because of the liberal policies and what the left is trying to do in our primary and secondary schools. So all those things, obviously was a good night. It's great to send President Trump to New Hampshire with some real wind underneath his sails.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed last night, and maybe perhaps you saw afterwards, the media coverage was not complimentary of Trump. It was interesting because we all sort of knew that based on the polling that it was going to end up like this. Donald Trump really performed very, very well as expected, and yet the media seemed to be in a different level of panic last night. Both CNN and MSNBC refused to air most of Trump's speech. MSNBC refused to air it in its entirety. The networks were warning their viewers that they couldn't see this unfiltered. And simultaneously, you had anchors on MSNBC alleging that it was white evangelicals that delivered the victory because they couldn't vote for Nikki Haley because she's a brown woman, alleging that Iowans are racist and sexist for voting for Trump over Nikki Haley. What do you make of all of this?
It's such a joke. These people are not serious, and I don't know how anybody, especially on the right, why any candidates on the right would ever give CNN or MSNBC or New York Times or Washington Post any quotes, any time, any attention. What happens? It's funny. As I was, I spent, a lot of time here in my home state of Iowa, in my hometown, and I was struck by when the national media kind of migrates in that last week, and they're dying for a story. They're dying for a horse race. They're just, they're looking for anybody to say anything that then they can, spin this, competitive race. It was never competitive. It was, and if you think about it, I mean, every single candidate, took their best shot. I mean, they spent millions of dollars. They, if you look at the price per vote in the Iowa caucus, I think, Ron and Nikki spent over $1,000 per vote that they got. It was extraordinary the amount of money that was spent to get a result that we probably all could have guessed 6 months ago was going to be the result.
Well, meanwhile, Donald Trump obviously had been the president of the United States. He was practically polling like he was the incumbent president of the United States leading up to the caucuses, performed very well naturally yesterday. But he was held up in court so much of the time. He wasn't able to campaign on the ground in Iowa as much as you might expect a presidential candidate to do in a primary process or a caucus process in this case. and yet still prevailed. What does that tell you?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things. One is he is tireless, and I see him up close, and his energy is unbelievable, and his ability to do handle all these things, whether it's have to be in court. Like today he's in court, and then he's going to go up to New Hampshire and have a rally, and he'll do it, and he'll do it exceptionally. He'll probably spend 2 hours talking to the folks in there. But what we saw here on the ground was, while the other candidates would struggle to get 100 people in a venue, we would get thousands in a venue, and we'd fill the room up. And so you could just tell that it was just a different style, different type of campaign. But I think the thing that maybe Vince, I'll tell you that I haven't told anybody yet is, our campaign on the ground was volunteers calling their neighbors, and we were just well organized, but at a very passionate and precinct level. And I don't know if that shows up nationally, but we had these Trump caucus captains. They all had the white hats with the gold lettering that President Trump ended up wearing on caucus day, and it made a huge difference when it wasn't paid door knockers or paid telephone calls. It was like neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, family member to family member.
It clearly worked. Now, the left is throwing everything they can at Donald Trump and, of course, his voters to try and stop him from, even appearing on the ballot, which is ballot rigging to begin with, and also to, as you point out, tie him up in court. He's in court today in Manhattan in this E. Jean Carroll case. Left unsaid by the media broadly is that the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit was funded by one of the biggest Democrat donors in the country, this guy Reid Hoffman, who, coincidentally, has also given $250,000 to Nikki Haley in the Republican primary. How much, to what lengths are Democrats willing to go here to upend the will of the voters?
Well, I think they'll go to any end. And then the real question that we all have to start asking is why? They are afraid of Donald Trump, I believe, because, he is not owned by anybody. The swamp can't control him. He will come in and fundamentally change the federal government, the executive branch, for good. And he'll bring people that, will fight those fights with him. And I think, as I read media coverage, that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of somebody that can actually change the way government does business. And, I think for 250 years, we had this system that was working, and it just has slowly been corrupted, mostly by unelected bureaucrats, primarily inside the Beltway. And, I think there's, I've worked with a lot of these folks, and there's plenty of good folks that want to do the right thing and that, that want to, serve the president's agenda. But then there are those that work against, especially in Donald Trump and his agenda. And that's, they know that Trump's going to fight through all that, and he's going to improve the lives of everyday Americans. And I don't know why they would be against that, but that's just what's going to happen.
A question that's definitely on my mind, and I'm sure it's on the mind of many of our listeners right now, Matt Whitaker, is do you think Trump has adequately learned the lesson of his first administration when it comes to making appointments that don't actually work against him? The big question, of course, was personnel coming into this latest attempt to go back to the White House. How different will a Trump presidency be if he's the 47th president rather than the 45th?
Yeah, well, two things. First of all, I don't want to speak against, my own service in the Trump administration.
Of course,
but yes,
of course,
he is going to bring in, I think, a initial class that is very strong and that will support his agenda. He has learned that lesson. I mean, he learned it in spades, and he also learned that he can change these things. And remember, as his former acting attorney general, he often said he loved his actings, because he knew he could, bring in somebody, and if the Senate wouldn't work with him to confirm who he wanted, then he could get, somebody else, through a acting appointment that could carry that agenda. So I think he's learned that, and I think he knows who he can trust and who he can't trust.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be such a big deal, and this kind of goes to the point that you were just making. I do think that a lot of the panic that you see setting in from establishment Washington is related to the fact that careers are on the line, that people are not going to be able to continue the status quo should Donald Trump return to the White House. And that panic is creating a whole host of efforts to try and literally debilitate the voters even having an option to choose him.
Yeah, and you just see how hard these blue states are trying to take him off the ballot, and I'm glad that's going to come to an end here soon in the Supreme Court of the United States. But
Yeah,
otherwise,
that's critical.
yeah, that's critical. And again, it's for me, it's really about the rule of law and making sure that our fundamental, precepts like due process and the like are respected and honored. And I just having, I've been very, close with Donald Trump, working with him and also, campaigning with him. And I just, he is motivated by kind of the forgotten man and woman in middle America, especially, that just feels like their interests aren't considered by the Washington political elites. And so I think that is so critical for kind of his mindset going into the next term.
Now, having been the Attorney General of the United States, you've got to be concerned about some of the left's plans right now to try and undermine the chief executive. There was an NBC report over the weekend headlined, "Fears Grow that Trump will use the military in dictatorial ways if he returns to the White House." And it summarized how there are outside organizations and lawmakers who are working together to, quote, foil any efforts to expand presidential power, which could include pressuring the military to cater to his political needs. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't this strike you as that the left is already plotting a coup to have the military just ignore the chief executive?
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like, but it's also dangerous hyperbole because, Donald Trump never asked me to do anything illegal or unethical, and he never will. I mean, he's going to have people around him that know the law, know where the bounds of the executive branch under the Constitution are, but he's also going to make sure that every tool that's available to him, he's able to use. I think about a small example where there was a military base on the border, and he was able to build a wall, that on that military base very quickly and easily. And so, there's ways to do it, and Donald Trump is going to have the people around him that give him great advice so that he can do everything by the law. And again, hopefully we can get a Congress. We had a Rhino Congress led by Paul Ryan in 17 and 18 that wouldn't do what was necessary to fix some of these problems. But I think we'll have a Congress. He's got over 100 congressional endorsements and many in the Senate as well. I think if we can get the majorities in 2024 and the presidency, I will see a significant change in some of these intractable problems, and we'll finally make progress on behalf of the American people.
All right. Matt Whitaker, former acting attorney general under President Trump and now a senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute, was there last night with President Trump in Iowa. Sir, good to have you with us. Thank you very much.